muting all of the other mics, I think, so if people can make sure that you are all muted in the audience there, so that we can hear what's going on. I'm just going to start sharing my slides now, and we'll do a little introduction there. My name is Dr. Rachel Murphy, and I'm the lecturer on the MA History of Family. And first of all, I would like to welcome everyone to today's History of Family event. It's being held in hybrid format, so we have some people here in the library, in the Glucksman Library, in the Special Collections and Archives Reading Room. So welcome to all of you. It's lovely to see you here. And we have a lot more people online as well, so it's great to see you as well. I also would like to introduce my colleague, Una Grace, who is the postgraduate executive administrator, and she will be making sure that everyone is okay online, making sure that the sound and everything is okay, and she'll shout out to me if there's a problem and we need to do something, but hopefully everything will run smoothly. So we have over 60 people that signed up for the event. People will probably be dipping in and out of it depending on their interests, but it's wonderful to see lots of new names and faces in the particularly in the online group, but equally great to see that we're being joined by some of our current undergraduates, our current postgraduates, and of course many of the alumni of the course. So welcome to everyone that's here today. So today's event is part of the Limerick Lifelong Learning Festival. So I'll just move forward there. And a big shout out in particular to those of you that are from Limerick and have joined us from here. But while it's a Limerick Festival, we have attendees from other parts of Ireland as well, from Europe, and from as far afield as the USA and Australia. So I'd like to give you all a really warm welcome. For those of you that aren't familiar with the University of Limerick, we're located on the west coast of Ireland, and we're very proud of our location. We have a fabulous green campus intersected by the River Shannon, and it's on the outskirts of a vibrant city that's steeped in history. The university was established in 1972, and it has over 17,000 students and approximately 500 staff. Now, I might be slightly out there, but that's about the numbers, I think. It offers many different programmes, and some of these are unique, including the MA History of Family. I don't think there's a course quite like it offered anywhere else. So I just want to show you the format for today. Here's the outline. I'm going to start off with a short introduction, just explaining what the History of Family is, what that entails. And then after that, 3 of our recent graduates are going to be discussing their research with you. And that will take us to 1 o'clock Irish time. And we'll then take a 10-minute break. And then after that, I'll go through what's involved in studying the MA History of Family, for those of you that might be interested in that. And then 4 of our recent graduates are going to tell us what they did after doing the MA, and how the MA contributed to those future developments. I just want to point out actually as well that this event is being recorded. We do, as I said, there's some people in Australia. I know there's someone in Canada that wanted to attend a bit early there. So I said, look, we'll send you a recording so you can listen to it. So again, if you have any friends who couldn't attend because of the time zones or whatever, get in touch with me and we can give you a link to the recording. Okay, so what is History of the Family? It's actually quite a recent field of study. It emerged in the 1960s from the discipline of social history. The new social history emphasised the importance of studying all of society, not just the rich and famous, or in some cases the infamous. So some social historians started taking what we call a history from below approach. That means they were researching history from the perspective of what we would call the ordinary people, rather than those who governed them. Essentially, they started writing back into history those who had previously been marginalised and excluded from the traditional historical accounts. These include people like the poor, women, and ethnic minorities. And there are lots of questions that we might have about these groups, things like class, gender, religious identity, occupations, and those kind of themes. Historians of the family analyse these topics and more, but it's all done through the prism of the family. And this provides us with the more nuanced understanding of how people lived in the past. So I'm sure when I mentioned the word family, most of you will have an image in mind, and it's quite probably based on your own family. But one thing to consider is that one person's concept of family might be quite different from another's. And that's because the idea of what constitutes a family is socially constructed. And by that, I mean, what we understand about family is based on assumptions that we share with those in the society that we live in. The notion of family isn't actually a static thing. Concepts of family can vary according to geography and time period. In early modern Ireland, for instance, the kinship group was really important. It was headed by a patriarch, and that was, the dominant form of family, if you like. But as we move on in time to the 19th century and beyond, the traditional nuclear family made up of parents and children started to dominate. And now if you look at families around you, there's so many different shapes and sizes that we need to think in those terms. There's no one idea of family. Over someone's lifetime as well, and you might be able to apply this to yourself, you might also belong to more than one family. Sociologists refer to a family of orientation, so that's the family that you're born into, and there's also a family of procreation, and that would be traditionally the family that you married into, but it could be your partner or whatever. If you have more than one marriage or partnership, then that's other families that you belong to. So there's multiple families that potentially you could belong to. Historians of family often do our research considering the family in terms of what we call the life course. So these are different roles that people play according to their life stage. So from birth, adolescence, adulthood, old age, and so on. We also think about the roles that that individuals played within their families, and also how families connected with the communities that they lived in. We look at migration, and there's two great presentations coming up that relate to migration, one to Australia and one to North America. And that's very significant in the Irish context. I'm sure most of you in the audience, particularly those that are from Ireland originally, will have family members that have moved somewhere else in the diaspora. So those are some of the things that we look at. I often get asked, and I know that in the audience and in the group in the room today, that there are people that have a background in genealogy. And sometimes people assume that the history of family is the same as genealogy, and it's not. Genealogy, family history, and history of family are all related. I do think there's a lot of overlap between them. And most genealogists that I know are not interested in simply doing a family tree. They're interested in understanding and researching the background and context for the people in that tree as well. Personally, I enjoy using genealogical research skills. I think they're really valuable, and I draw on them a lot in my own research, but they're not the same thing. So what happens is many students that come to the MA History of Family, and some of the ones presenting today, including Aileen, who's our next presenter, first of all started off studying genealogy and have considerable expertise in that area. Some people have maybe done the certificate course here at UL, others have maybe studied at places like UCD and UCC that have or had courses there also. But what we're doing in the History of Family is we're taking individual families and we're situating them within the broader context of socio-economic history. There's two ways we can do this. Sometimes we take a top-down approach. So we might start off by looking at an entire population using large data sets. For those of you who are numerically minded, looking at the population as a whole, and then taking things like censuses or demographic information, migration data maybe, using quantitative analysis to see what's going on there. But then we might use genealogical research techniques to then look at individual case studies that helps us to understand this, have this more nuanced understanding of what was happening at a family level as well. And then sometimes we do what I'd call a bottom-up approach, which is where we maybe find a family or a community that we want to research. I know Jamie's going to be talking about a very particular community, as is, well, I think all three presenters today are actually. And you might then take a bottom-up approach and see, okay, how do they fit within that overall historical context? So the history of family isn't genealogy, but it is a really valuable skill set to have. If you don't have it, though, we also go through all of the different sources and techniques that you would use. So you don't have to have that background either. So this brings me on to some different types of research that historians of the family might do. One aspect of our work, which I think Aileen's going to be drawing on, is household composition. Who made up the household and how were they related? If you were to select a street or a townland in the 1901 or 1911 census, and you looked at all of the different households that were made up there, they're not all going to look the same. You'll have some nuclear families, you might have a single parent family, you might have a household that includes foster children or stepchildren. Some single people live alone and others live with their siblings or relatives. So these are the kind of things that we explore. Occasionally, you might find 3 generations living together, and that's what we would describe as a STEM family. And many families might live together in a tenement building, you know, in Limerick or in Dublin. Or alternatively, you might have a big house that has one family living in this huge mansion, along with multiple servants. So there's all different kinds of groups that we might look at, and analysing these groupings helps us to understand more about how past families lived. As well as understanding how families were structured, we also consider them as economic units, and that draws on economic history. Many of the decisions that families make, both now and in the past, are based on financial factors. So who's going to inherit the family farm or business? Who's going to emigrate? Should someone leave home, or should they go to school or to college? What kind of work does each family member do, and how does that contribute to the family economy? So those are some of the things that other historians of family might be interested in looking at. And then a final example that I want to give you, and this is not exhaustive, there's many other things that historians of family do, but another thing that we're really interested in is family relationships. And if you're doing that kind of study, you would draw on what we call qualitative sources, so things like letters, diaries, and memoirs. You can analyse those thematically, and that kind of research will help us to understand the relationships, emotional responses, because those can vary depending on the time period that you're looking at, and also we can understand more about the social conventions of the period. Social historians, including the historians of family, often conduct research through lenses such as gender or class, and those of you that have done the course or are currently doing the course will be very familiar with those themes as well. We consider historical expectations of people based on their gender. But the notion that, for instance, the woman's place is in the home while the husband is the breadwinner who goes out to work was a Victorian ideal, a middle class ideal. And we might actually ask, you know, to what extent was that the reality? And were these public and private spheres as differentiated as we might think? If you think about pre-industrialization, we know that many families together were a productive unit. If we think of pre-famine Ulster, for instance, you could take a weaving family there, and all the family members would be based in the home. The women would be doing the spinning, the men would be weaving, and the children would be expected to assist in all kinds of different ways. So, you know, we look at some of these ideals and we say, how much did that relate to the actual reality? But the breadwinner model doesn't only fit into questions around gender, it also plays into ideas of class. So, as I mentioned before, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, middle-class women were not expected to work. They often employed servants, and that would be seen as a sign of their social status. Working-class women had no choice but to work. The pin money that farming women might earn through selling butter or eggs contributed significantly to the household economy, as did the wages of women in industrial areas like Belfast, for instance, who brought in steady employment from their work in the factories. So these are just some of the themes that we look at as historians of the family. Each year, I'm always amazed by the range of exciting studies that our students do. There's always a fascinating and varied range of topics that they undertake. And what I'm hoping is that in this next session, when you hear our three graduates of the History of Family presenting on their research, it'll give you a flavour of some of the exciting things that they've done. So I think at this point, I'm going to move on to our first presenter, who is Aileen Witt. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I'll just check in case there are any questions there, but what we might do is we'll have the 3 presenters, and then any questions for the 3 presenters or about the history of family in general, you know, in terms of themes and so on, you feel free to do those. People online, you can put any questions in the meeting chat, and then Una will pick up on those, and people in the audience can raise their hands at the end of the session. So we might just share your slides next, Aileen. We'll just pop them up on the screen. And I'll just introduce Aileen to everyone. So Aileen graduated in January with an MA in the history of family. It was a surprise, wasn't it? We can talk about that later. In terms of, she kept it a secret from her family for a really long time, and then they were invited to the graduation ceremony. I don't know how you managed that, Aileen, but anyway. But prior to this, Aileen completed a certificate and then a diploma in family history genealogy at UCD under Sean Murphy, I presume, a fantastic teacher of genealogy. By day, Aileen is a mainframe systems programmer for AIB. She's an IBM champion advocating for new mainframers and for women in IT. And she also chairs the Women in IT stream and co-chairs the network stream of the GSE UK conference. In her free time, she tells me she enjoys shooting dancers and hunting dead people, aka photography and genealogy. Aileen is on the committee of the Clare Root Society. She's a member of the Meath History Workshop, the Archaeological and History Society, the Irish Genealogical Research Society, and she's also on the Register of Qualified Genealogists. Having moved to Trim over 20 years ago, Aileen developed a fascination with the area, which was the focus of her MA dissertation. And she's recently also published an article. Without further ado, I think I'll hand over to you, Aileen. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rachel. So many thanks for asking me to present today. I'm delighted and excited to be able to share some of my experiences and to encourage anyone who is interested to take up study or further education of any sort, both for professional reasons and even more importantly, for the fun of learning, because it's absolutely brilliant. As Rachel said, I'm Aileen Wynne. By day, I'm a mainframe systems programmer, which technically is a 9-to-5 job. Realistically, it's extremely intense. There's a lot of late nights, weekend work, there's an on-call rota. The good thing is nobody will die as a result of a crisis. It's only money. But my job does rely on a lot of time and effort going into it. So it is intense, but it is the best job in the world if your brain works like mine. So the course has nothing to do with work. It was just for the fun of it and for the love of learning and for the absolutely fascinating subject matter that we can get into. And I was delighted to start the course, and I've really enjoyed it right the way through. As with anything that's worth anything, it's a lot of hard work, absolutely worth it. When I started, I had no idea what I wanted to work on. I knew that in Trim there were some extant 1821 census records, and I kind of knew that might be something I'd like to look at, but that was it. So really the source chose me rather than me choosing what I was going to work on. How do I get to the next?
Just need to get the mouse.
Lovely. There we go. So I wanted to work out what I could do with the 1821 census. Now, it's not something you get to work on every day, but it is available for free on the National Archives website. And there are 2 sets of 1821 census transcriptions, which brings its own set of challenges. But the information that they have within those census records is phenomenal. So, for example, the record that I have here is house number 217 in Manorlands, and it shows the Joseph Fisher, who's a house servant, and on one transcription it just says pension soldier, but on the other it tells you the regiment he was from and what pension he is on. In that house there's also Mary Fisher, his wife, and Ellen Brandley, who's also a servant. But the best bit is on the far side. It is the observations column, and in this case it says that this is the glebe house in which the Reverend Richard Butler resides, who's a really cool, famous historian. But that he was in Scotland at the time they took the census. How brilliant is that? We now know where he was, and it was not at home. So by Christmas, I had worked out what I wanted to look at, and I decided that I wanted to look at the relationship, or lack thereof, between the people in some of the townlands in Trim in 1821 to 1901 and 1911. Okay, so as you can see from the map here, I originally looked at 6 townlands that were easily identifiable because the names were in 1821, 1901 and 1911. I had to drop 2 of them. Unfortunately, Blackfriary, which is the townland that I lived in, we were missing some of it in 1821, and it got divided into urban and rural in 1901 and 1911. And also that really large townland of Trimblestown got split up into smaller townlands in the later census records. So that was the end of that. So in the end, I chose 4 townlands, and I looked at the pre-famine demography and compared it with extant census material, mid-century substitutes, etc. The 4 townlands I chose stayed the same literally between 1821 through the tide allotment books, the field books, Griffith's valuation, the council valuation books, right the way through to 1901, 1911. There was loads of questions to answer. So, for example, in Steeplestown, which is the townland on the far side, none of the names that were in 1821 were still there in 1901 and 1911. So where did they go? Did they immigrate? Did the names change through marriage? Did something else happen? How long were the families that were living there in 1911? How long had they been there? I also was looking at how many of the families in Trim in 1821 were still in the area in 1901 and 1911. In Oakstown, which is the one just here, there's one family, and the same family name was there in 1821 through to 1911. It turns out that they were the same family, but I didn't know it at the time. So I was kind of looking also how the family structures and the population had changed and remained static during the time period. I also looked at family structures, marriage rates, ages at marriage, and occupations in Trim, looking at the trends, similarities and differences between the various time periods, and investigated why the changes occurred, attempting to understand the reasons behind these changes. I also attempted to reconstruct the families living in the townlands, trying to trace the 1821 families forwards and the 1901, 1911 families backwards. I'll come back to that one later. So the historiography of the early census records and the reliability or lack thereof is wide, it's varied, but K.H. Connell and Brian Guerin are et al. There's loads of resources on that. I also had excellent secondary sources on the demographic sides of the study, particularly Peter Connell's The Land and People of County Meath, 1750 to 1850, which used the 1821 census, but really concentrated on Navan more than Trim itself, which was really handy for me. And also Kevin O'Neill's Family and Farm in Pre-Famine Ireland, the parish of Killashandra, which was based on the 1841 census. But again, the information and his methodologies were really, really helpful. There's also multiple papers by Yoshifumi Shimizu and Francis Carney, loads of articles, and especially Reith na Meath, which is the journal from the Meath Archaeological and Historical Society. So they were the real secondary sources that I used. So then, in an attempt to scrutinise the relationships between 1821, 1901 and 1911, I also used many primary sources and a lot of genealogical methods, surprisingly enough. So without question, the household returns for all of the censuses, the census reports themselves, which do actually exist right the way through. So I use them. Land records, as I've already mentioned, the tithe allotments, Griffith's valuation, estate sales. I only found a small subset of records from them, but one of them came from the 1967 Reith na Meath. Others were on Ancestry. And then the only actual physical research I had to do was the council valuation books in the Irish Life building in Abbey Street. So I used civil registration, parish records, graveyards, maps, lots of maps. I love maps, they're brilliant. Newspapers are phenomenal for little stories here and there, trade directories. There's no actual estate records for anywhere that I was looking at, which was quite unfortunate. One of my favourite things was the dog licenses. I didn't have anything in the prison registers, the dog licenses, because it gives you a really good indication that somebody is there for a decent amount of time. So that's kind of the sources that I used. So my findings and my conclusions. So the main findings that of the 13 families that were there in 1821, there was only one that remained, and that was the King family. They were large farmers. They remained there till 1949, and they're the only example of continuity of tenure. All of the other families recorded in 1821 had disappeared. Might have been migration, might have been the effects of the famine. They could also just have gone to Dublin, but because the names were really, really common, I couldn't prove that it was them or not. I just couldn't quite get there. Post Griffiths valuation, there's a much stronger continuity of tenure. What was interesting was the land owned by Lord Trimblestown, so the townlands of Kilnagross, Oakstown and Phillistown all had a much stronger continuity, and the people that were there in 1855 were also there in 1901 and 1911, whereas in Steeplestown, none of those people were there. Possibly because that land got sold a couple of times through the estate sale, and then later on the people living there actually purchased the land. So those families may or may not have been related. I couldn't quite get there. The analysis also showed that the family structures in the townlands changed from being exclusive, simple nuclear families in 1821. By the later censuses, we had some examples of extended or STEM families. The family composition and household sizes within the study differ from the findings of Carney and Shimizu, which really kind of highlights the importance of microstudies as a means to validate and understand nuance of population demographics in smaller areas, in contrast to like the overall perspective. I'm sure if somebody looked at other areas in Meath, their findings would be different to mine, which would, you know, it evens out. And then it'll agree with Shimizu and Carney, but mine were a bit different. So I was talking about reconstructing the families. So going forward from 1821 was not very successful. And I think part of that was from 1821, the census, to 1829, where we started our parish records. That was kind of when everyone was having their children. And so by the time, they just disappeared from the records because you couldn't tell who they were. And I couldn't tell later on if those marriages were from, you know, I couldn't tell if they were the right family or not. The townland is not always recorded in the parish record, and that was kind of the problem. So going forward, we'll have old newspapers, more of them being made available online, and OCR is getting better. So hopefully it'll be easier to track and you know, hunt down more people over time, and we'll be able to make better, more efficient searches in the newspapers. Unfortunately, Petty Sessions didn't really give me anything good. There was no really juicy stories there. A couple of people who didn't have dog licenses and a couple of people who were a bit drunk. That was it. Sometimes it's a great resource. So that was my earlier families. Now rebuilding from 1901 going back to 1911, 1901 and going back was much more successful, because obviously by that stage I had civil registration. People were much better at registering things, parish registers and all of the resources I mentioned earlier. So that was, I could go back a number of generations. That also highlighted, and this is a massive thing, it also highlighted families who had dropped through the land records and census substitutes. I just found them in parish records and on some gravestones. So that was quite a significant thing. Analysis of the decanical census reports, comparing it to Griffith's valuation and the revision books, highlighted that some of the houses within one of the townlands, they're not recorded anywhere. They weren't in the revision books. I couldn't see who owned them. So that and the discovery of other family names associated with townlands highlights the very precarious nature of recording poorer families. As I said, the course was brilliant. I really, really enjoyed it. I've lost my, there you go. So yeah, I've been delighted to be able to share this with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aileen. I think that's a fantastic presentation, and it was a really exciting piece of research. I think very lucky that there's not many places for which the 1921 census survives, and only someone who had those genealogical skills would be able to do that work, to be able to, as you say, try and trace families forwards and trace them backwards. But I think for me, the most, like you say, the most exciting thing in your research was realizing that there's these families that wouldn't have been picked up unless Aileen had done that research. And I've had other students do that in other areas as well, and find families that there's just very, very few records of, and it's only by doing these really important micro studies that we pick up on them. Also, the fact that you said, you know, some of the received scholarship, you know, by doing these micro studies, we can see that actually, as you say, you have that population level data, but there can be a lot of variance in different localities. So Really great work there, Aileen, and thank you for sharing. I'm sure there'll be questions for you afterwards. But we do need to move on now to the next presentation. So I'm just going to log out, stop sharing my screen. And I will introduce our next speaker. So the next speaker is Jamie Groom. And like Aileen, Jamie graduated from the MA History of Family here at the University of Limerick in January 2024. He completed the certificate in the History of Family and Genealogical Methods here at the University of Limerick as well, and that was the previous year, and he said he found it an easy transition from one course to the next. Jamie is a founder member of Borrisoleigh Historical Society, and with colleagues and support from the Irish Community Archive Network, ICAN, at National Museum of Ireland, they are working together on an online project to link diaspora with their heritage in the locality. So that's a really exciting project. Jamie first attended UL in 1991, and he left that course early, but he returned to UL to study French, and then he came back to study the history of family as well. And he's now back again. We can't stop you from coming back to UL, Jamie. He's studying towards diploma in equality, diversity and inclusion. And in his daily work, Jamie assists newly arrived immigrant families. And he hopes, and I think this is really exciting, he hopes that one day he can connect his research into the Irish diasporic communities and his work that he does in his day job with the arriving new Irish, combining both of these strands into a new piece of meaningful research that may assist and give insight into how to build successful modern communities. And we hope you might do that at UL as well, Jamie. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Jamie, now and to present on your research. Thanks very much.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Rachel, thank you very much. Like Aileen, I really enjoyed the course. It was one of the best decisions I made. When I left in '93 with my tail between my legs, I came back 30 years later, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. This morning I'm going to present to you a brief outline to my MA dissertation research of 2023. The genesis of this research was created quite a few years ago when I sent a message in a bottle, an old-fashioned method, but it was new technology. The message was my DNA, and it connected me with a relative in Australia that was 200 years, 7 generations ago. And through some initial research, we worked out that we had ancestors that lived in the same townland. Mine got to stay, and hers were evicted and emigrated. So that is the initial research question: why did mine stay, and why did hers have to emigrate? Next year, 2025, will be the 175th anniversary since the mass evictions took place on the parcel of land which encompasses 7 townlands. It's the Cooleen Cullehill estate. This was in the possession of a Lord Landaff right through from the Cromwellian settlement up until the 1830s, when it was sold to property developers. And approximately 15 years later, the evictions took place. I knew nothing. I live adjacent to these 7 townlands, and nobody knew anything about this eviction. It was not in any histories locally. And one of the reasons I undertook this research was because of this gap locally and nationally, and it's something I suppose we're only coming to terms with in the last, since the 1990s, is telling this tale of the Irish famine and what happened afterwards, the traumatic events that took place throughout the 19th century. There had been no record of the event except for the newspapers. In the last 10 years, Claire O'Brien has done great work on the Toomevara evictions, and so that had been the only piece that had been done locally. My question really was, what were the driving forces that created and sustained the chain migration of Borrisoleigh families to Australia? Why did they go? Why did others stay behind? Who went? How did they go? Where did they go? Rural versus urban. what happened and what happened when they got there. I divided my research chronologically and geographically into 3 areas: Bursley and Tipperary, and Ireland before, during the famine and up to the evictions, then the departure and the mass chain migration of people from the locale across the southern oceans to Australia. I looked at how that passage was financed, managed, and how the government-sponsored passage was used to the emigrants' advantage, the huge remittance system that was used to benefit those still at home and those that followed out. And the third part, I moved the dissertation to Australia. The convict story, the squattocracy, the land that ran for miles, digging for gold instead of rotten potatoes, insurrection, sectarianism, but also opportunity, success, and sometimes disasters again. All the while I did this while telling the story of 2 extended family groups, the Shanahans of Carrigean and Ballarat, my long lost ancestor, and the Cairns of Glenanogue and Burrawa. I followed them as they travelled not only with their brothers and sisters, picks and shovels, but also with their pikes, priests, prayer books, and politicians, as their religious and political beliefs and convictions became an integral part of their immigration and their subsequent establishment. The driving forces that caused the chain migration, and the answer to my research question was given in my assessment and the analysis of the various political and social events that occurred at this time. These were all part of a broader period of social upheaval and economic distress in Ireland at the time.
Jamie, it's just Rachel. Sorry to interrupt. Are the slides meant to be moving forward? Because
they are on mine.
Yeah, that's fine. I will just go through. Which slide number are you on? If you want to shout them out, I can move them forward for you. Sorry,
I'll just skip through them there. There's slide 2, you missed it. There's slide 3. There's slide 4. And we're on 5. Sorry about that.
That's fine. Don't worry. If you shout it out, because I don't think it's working for you. So just shout out when you want them to change, Jamie. Okay?
Are you on slide 5 now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. So the sources and methods. The case studies of these 2 kindred group of families was wholly situated within the spectrum of the history of family as defined by Michael Anderson. I used the household economic, sentiment, and demographic methods, and they help to define, describe, and understand the whole of the situation and the driving forces that created and sustained the migration. For instance, the quantitative household economic work done by Ganaan, the Vanishing Irish, etc., cornerstoned the study and helped to provide the best reasoning for the decisions to emigrate. The demographic approach made use of statistics, land records, family size and systems, household labour strategies, and the inability to purchase land. In addition, some analysis of census records helped to give context and setting to the scene around Bursley pre and post famine. That's the population decrease in the 7 townlands. You can see it averages just below 50% between 1841 and 1851, which was huge. I also used the shipping and immigration records from the UK and the arrival records and the remittance records. These were all available online in Australia. The sentiments approach, which I found the most interesting, utilized contemporary personal testimonies, oral histories, folklore, song, and some contemporary parallel accounts of the experiences of the workhouse, the passage, servitude in Australia, and the employment situation as a whole. David Fitzpatrick's Oceans of Consolation was essential to this. The private Cairns family correspondence and the Shanahan brothers' family history was also fundamental. I also used contemporary reportage from local and national newspapers, as well as writers like the travel writer Gustave de Beaumont, William Butler, James Fintan Lawler gave huge insight into the social and political turmoil of the 1840s. James Fintan Lawler was actually arrested in Borrisoleigh in 1848. On the Australian side too, there was much contemporary records of the time of land squatting, gold prospecting, the Ballarat uprising, and the Tipperary settling of Burrawa and surrounds. The vital records of parish, marriage and baptism in Borrisoleigh in Australia, Griffith's valuation and other genealogical research techniques aided in locating individuals and connecting and reconstructing the families pre and post-famine, pre-immigration and post-arrival in Australia. That's the townland of Carrigean with the family homesteads in the top left, the Shanahans and the Cairns is in the bottom right. Neither homesteads are there at the moment, but on a walk one July evening, I found the remains of the Shanahan homestead, which is in the bottom left. The local newspapers, the conservative Nenagh Guardian and the more nationalistic Limerick Reporter and Tipperary Vindicator from editor Maurice Lenihan, assisted the reconstruction of the lives and times of our prospective immigrants. In one newspaper, actually, after looking at it and going back to it several times, I discovered that one of my protagonists had subscribed 2 shillings and 6pence to the famine relief locally 3 years before his own ill misfortune. The top donation had been £30 by the Honourable Mrs. Otway Cave. He was second from the bottom. The family notices from the Australian newspapers were essential also. The Ballarat Courier, the Geelong Advertiser, they helped to piece the stories together. This one in particular is to a daughter of the land agent that was heavily involved in the evictions. And she later became the first headmistress of the Catholic National School in Ballarat and taught all former evictees' children. So I thought that quite ironic. To complete and augment the study, census reports, parliamentary reports, and the reports from the Land and Immigration Commissioners gave a general overview. The shipping records, the logbooks were available online, as were the immigration deposit journals in Sydney. One of the most interesting primary sources I got was a solicitor's box that I traced to the Roscrea Heritage Society. And this had all the details of the land, of the 7 townlands and the estate from the Cromwellian resettlement and ownership by the merchant adventurers in the 1650s and 60s, right up to the Land Commission of the 1920s and 30s. And I think it's something I'd love to return to sometime. One of the downturns of the dissertation was the non-availability of written testimony from the bulk of emigrants. It did limit the scope of the study, but I was able to obtain verified communications in the form of some letters from an original emigrant, Patrick Kearns, when he was 7 years of age. He left when he was 7. And another from his grandchild's memoir that described and discussed the original migration. These sources have been a most useful qualitative source and have conveyed the experiences as remembered and retold by the witnesses. The family history documents of the Shanahan, Harty and Kearns' family greatly assisted in building a picture of post-arrival and further family formation and the proliferation of the kin groups and their successful progression. The secondary sources were also very essential. There were the local secondary sources. There's great work being done by Dennis Marnan, Dennis Grace, O'Brien. But some of the great works on the transnational Irish diaspora were done by Richard Reid, who wrote about the Clonoulty in South Tipperary, the Clonoulty immigration to New South Wales, and Bruce S. Elliott, who wrote about the North Tipperary Protestants to Canada. Also, Oliver McDonough, David Fitzpatrick, McLaughlin, and of course Patrick Joseph Farrell deserve special mention. Nearly there. That was from David Fitzpatrick's Oceans of Consolation. Michael Normile to his father in Clare. You know, he was really selling it. 2 crops of potatoes in 1 year. Where would you get it? As Hilary Mantel said, evidence is always partial and facts are not the truth. Information is not knowledge and history is not the past. It is the method we have evolved for organising our ignorance of the past. The goal of this study had always been to provide the reader in an objective manner with as much evidence that had been available to me within the framework and the methodology discussed to provide an accurate analysis of the evidence with a satisfactory conclusion reached. All of this was done to conquer the ignorance of the past so that it might inform our concerns for the future. The conclusion that I reached was that despite their best efforts, and as the spectre of famine climbed up the social ladder, many of the people could no longer provide protection, safety, or opportunity to their children or their kin. Their economic choices were limited, and whilst being denied their full citizenship rights in their home country, they simply sought those rights in another. They had survived the initial terror of the Great Hunger, and with agency, skill, knowledge, and pure hard-headedness, managed to avoid the workhouse and used all assistance possible to improve their lot by travelling to Australia. And there they became, as the great Irish-Australian historian Oliver McDonough called, a founding people of that modern nation. And that's the golden summer outside Eaglemont in Melbourne, where some of my people settled. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And again, a wonderful presentation and some great research. I mean, you have to read the entire dissertation there as well. But I think what's great about it is these hidden histories. It's amazing that the local community, you know, it wasn't that long ago and they didn't know of the events that had happened there. And I think you've done some really important work there, Jamie, in uncovering what happened and, you know, highlighting what happened in that local community. And I think, you know, again, that then builds on the work that you're doing locally, trying to link the community in Borrisoleigh with the diaspora and so on. I think there's some fantastic local community work going on there. So really interesting. So I'm sure you will get some questions about this as well. But thank you very much, Jamie.
Thank you.
Just in the interest of time, because we are running a little bit behind schedule, but I think we'll move on very quickly to Breed here. I'd like to introduce you all to Breed O'Sullivan, our next speaker. Breed currently lives in Cork, but she grew up on the north side of Dublin. She has strong links to County Clare, where both her parents are from. She's a graduate of Maynooth University, and in 2019, she returned to education nearly 25 years after getting her first degree. She attained a diploma in genealogy from UCC, University College Cork, and then she completed the Masters in History of Family here at the University of Limerick, and she graduated in 2020. Breed is currently a PhD research student at Mary Immaculate College, so she's still in Limerick, where her current research on migration from West Clare builds upon what she did in her master's dissertation. So thank you very much, Breed.
Thank you, Rachel. Can everybody hear me okay?
Perfectly,
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. As Rachel said, my name is Breed O'Sullivan, and I'm a graduate of the Masters in History of the Family at the University of Limerick, and I graduated in 2020. I'm currently a PhD student, like Rachel said, and I'm building on the research that I did through the Masters of History of the Family that I'll speak about today. I've always had a love of family history and also genealogy, so this master's programme was extremely interesting to me. And like others have said, like James said, I went back to education after a large gap. I think I left university in 1996, so it was something that really interested me, that got me back into education. So I'll just go on to the next slide. My research and my completed dissertation was centred on a small townland in West Clare, and it looked at the families and the individuals who lived there and their very different life courses. It falls at a juncture of many different types of historical study, not only the history of the family, but also demographic history, social history, and local history, which, when worked together, can seek to reveal the historical experiences of the people, of the individuals in the community, rather than the history of the society as a whole. The title of my dissertation was The Townland of Knocknageroon, a study of population, households, family, people and migration. And it's the study of this small townland called Knocknageroon, which is situated near the tip of the Loophead Peninsula in West Clare. So stretching westward from the seaside town of Kilkee and located approximately 20 kilometres from the large market town of Kilrush, the Loophead Peninsula is bounded on the northwest by steep cliffs which fall to the Atlantic Ocean, and on the southeast by the River Shannon, which stretches westward to the Atlantic Ocean as well. And the peninsula is approximately 30 kilometres long and only 5 kilometres in breadth, and it is overwhelmingly rural. This is Knocknageroon townland, west of Kilkee, as I said, and outlined in blue. I spent a lot of time there as a child visiting my grandparents, and it's very typical of rural Ireland. Lots of ruins of old houses, and the land being farmed predominantly by older male bachelors with no children in any of the houses. Yet the 1901 and 1911 censuses of this townland showed a vibrant community of large families and children. In 1901, there were 9 households recorded by the census, and in 1911, there were 8. So my research analysed the population of this small townland as it existed at the taking of each census, and matching these census returns allowed a very intimate insight into changes over time at the simplest level, which is the townland. And these changes, along with using primary sources such as births, deaths and marriages, especially migration sources such as passenger lists, naturalization paperwork and United States Census returns. And that would show us who left home, where they went to, who they went to, who was their sponsor, what they worked at and who they married. And it also informed us as to who had died at home, what changes happened in the household structure, when these changes happened, and how it affected the family for its ultimate survival. Well, here are some of the research questions that I wanted to answer in my dissertation. I wanted to go beyond the census, which is in essence a photo snapshot of one night only. And I wanted to find out what happened to everyone. Where did they go and why? There's an old saying in West Clare that laments in empty houses when the hearth goes cold, the life is gone from the house. And there are numerous old ruins and derelict farmhouses in West Clare where in times gone, the hearth was never let go cold. It was never let go out, and it was migration that emptied these houses. And this area has seen considerable depopulation right up to the present day, which has its roots within the migration flows of the 19th century, especially the late 19th century. And the population of this townland in 1851 was 84. By 1911, there was 41 people there. And by the time I was visiting my grandparents there in the 1970s and 80s, there were about 11 people living there. So my research questioned where did this population go to, but it also questioned how come some households survived and others did not. The 2 poorest families in this townland were wiped from Knocknageroon, with just one member of one of those families left in 1911. The other members had died or emigrated, and in one case they had left to go to another family member's home in a different townland. And by poorest families, I mean the ones who held no land. They were agricultural labourers with just small gardens outside their houses for growing food and vegetables. So migration saw the young leave Knocknageroon, and in particular females left in higher numbers, and this left a void for marriage at home. Late marriage was also caused by late inheritance. Land and farms were not handed over when the heir was young. Migration from this area was all chain migration, laid down during the 19th century by a pioneer from each family, and chain migration made the state of Connecticut, and in particular its cities of New Milford, Waterbury, New Haven, Danbury and Bridgeport, the most prevalent and preferable areas to move to, along with Chicago, Buffalo, and to a much lesser extent New York. Migration from this area to Britain, Australia or other North American cities seems to have been far less significant. Are some of my findings from my research. Return migration was far more prevalent than previously thought. Endurance of some families was solely due to return migration and the child returning whether they wanted to or not. And there are a few examples where they did not want to. It was inheritance. Lots of families and individuals returned from America solely for inheritance of the family farm. You had the total loss of the poorest families, sometimes pre-censuses being taken, pre-1901 and 1911. And celibacy and bachelorhood by the child left at home and left the farm led to the end of a lot of these families. So return migration, surprisingly very high, never did match the picture of migration as this final goodbye with the child never to be seen again. In fact, quite a few of the migrants from this townland returned on holidays quite a few times, and some even retired back to their childhood home after lifetime spent working and living in Chicago. Return migration, as I previously said, was linked to inheritance upon the death of the head of the family or the heir. And one example, just to give you a few examples, was a man called Patrick Gorman, who left for Chicago after 1911, and he married there and he had children. And upon the death of his mother and two brothers from TB in Kilrush Workhouse, Patrick and his family moved back to Knocknageroon and allowed the Gorman family name to continue and the land to be kept in the family. But what happened was his American-born children allowed further migration in the future, with his son moving to Chicago, and in later years some of his grandchildren also being facilitated to do so by their parents being born there. Another example was their neighbour, Margaret O'Gorman, who had migrated to Danbury in Connecticut in 1903, and she had married there. But when her father and her brother, who was the heir, both died, as the eldest child, Margaret came home with her husband and her children to inherit the farm. Two of her children had been born in Danbury. When her daughter was of age, she went back to Danbury and lived out her life there, but she did return home on frequent visits to her two bachelor brothers. So this gentleman in the middle here is Joseph MacDonald. He was born in Knocknageroon in 1898 and he immigrated to Danbury in Connecticut in 1927. So this is just to show an example of some of the type of sources, both primary and secondary, which were used to piece together his life course. So Irish census returns, civil registration documents such as births, deaths and marriages, migration records such as passenger lists and naturalization records, newspaper obituaries, and also further census records from the United States of America. The three girls in this picture on the left-hand side are Joseph's sisters, photographed here pre-1933. And the girl in the middle is Eileen, or Eily, and she also left Knocknageroon for Danbury in Connecticut to join her brother and also an older sister. In 1928 she left, and she applied for a nursing programme while there, and while undergoing her medical it was found that she had TB. So she returned home to Knocknageroon, to her family, and she died there in 1933, aged 25. And her sister on the right is Catherine, also known as Catty, and she left Knocknageroon as she joined the Sisters of Mercy, and she went to their convent in Mallow, where she lived really until she died in the 1980s. The sister on the left is May, or Mary, and she actually stayed at home, and she married a local farmer, actually in a double wedding with her brother, who married the sister of her new husband. The photograph on the right is taken when their older sister Margaret, also known as Aggie, came home for the first time in 1949. She had migrated to Danbury in 1924, and this was her first time coming home to see her family. That's her in the top, standing right over to the right. So this is just some small insights into some different individual life courses through migration and some of the families from Knocknagarroon. So I'll leave it there. I'll finish here. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you very much, Breed. I'm echoing there, I'm not sure why. Thank you very much for a great presentation there, Breed. And, again, there's some really interesting strands from doing these kind of studies. That return migration finding of yours, typically it's been thought that the common received knowledge is that there wasn't much return migration. And the more studies like this that are happening, the more we see that actually it was much more of a common feature than we might have thought before. I also love that slide where you have the sources that you use, because I think that really brings it home to everyone. The amount of skill that people have to do this kind of research. Very often, particularly the poorer members of society don't leave many records behind, and you have to be quite creative seeing where you find them. Now, obviously, you have your family records there, but other people, like the people that Jamie was looking at, some of the people that Aileen was looking at, can be very difficult to track down. So it takes a lot of skill and time to do that kind of work. But I really enjoyed all three of those presentations. Thank you, all three of you. I realise that we're running a little bit late, but what I'm going to propose is that maybe we take 10 minutes for questions now. And if people need to take a break or whatever while we're doing the questions, we can do that. And then we'll kind of get back onto time with the next session. So what I might do is I might ask Aileen, do you want to come up to the front, Aileen? It's just the two of us here. And Breed and Jamie, if there are any questions for any of you, then we can answer those. So I don't know, Una's been monitoring the chat there. I don't know if there's any questions, Una?
There was two questions there, I think, for Jamie, but he's answered them actually in the chat. But I can read them out if people want to see them, or if they're yeah, so Bridget has a question there. Jamie, thanks for an excellent presentation. Who was the writer, Bruce, person you mentioned? And Jamie just answered there. Bruce S. Eliot, The North Tipperary Protestants in the Canadas, A Study of Migration, 1850 to 1880. And he's given I think the PhD thesis as well there, just for reference too. And the other was related to Jamie's presentation as well. What map resources did you use for research? OSI, and he said yes, and Griffith's valuation maps, but I don't see any other questions there at the moment. Oh, there's one here from Shane.
Just arrived. Yes,
yeah,
from Shane.
sorry.
So maybe answer that. He's asking the difference between genealogy, family history, and history of family. Now, the lines I do think are quite blurred. If you're going to talk about genealogy, traditionally genealogy would be doing your family tree, your pedigree chart. I think most genealogists that I know now, that's not only what they do. That's part of what you might do, but it goes beyond that, and that's where I would say family history comes in, where you're looking at that family, you're looking at it in its context, you're trying to understand the relationships and so on. Now there is overlap, and we have a big debate in the first session of the MA History of Family. Everyone talks about this, and we say what we all think about it, and I would say that the lines are blurred. But the history of family is more looking at things from a social history perspective. So we're looking at things like those social structures, and we're looking through the prism of the family to see what that tells us about society as a broader entity. So they're all interconnected, but they're slightly different. Traditionally you're doing, looking at your births, marriages, deaths, and all those other kinds of great records to construct the pedigree chart. But Aileen would probably disagree with me now, it's more than that. But family history then is putting the flesh on the bones a bit more, a bit like maybe who you are, the kind of things that you do there. And then history of family is maybe then just bringing that into that more social and economic and demographic history context, you know, looking at it from those perspectives as well. But there is a lot of overlap, you know, so I don't know if that helps. History of Families, academic genealogy, that's Claire. I don't know if that's Claire Bradley there. There's a couple of Claires commenting, so it might be Claire Bradley commenting, possibly, I don't know. Yeah, possibly. What I don't like is having that distinction between, you know, this is academic and this is not academic, because I tend to see things as connected. Same with local history, I'd see it all as connected. There's very valuable work being done by people inside academia and outside of academia, and my preferred way of working would be to collaborate. I think that's really important. But yeah, potentially that might be a way of looking at it. There's another question then from Lynn.
Active use of school collections.
Yes.
There.
Oh yes, yes. So sorry. Did anyone consult the school's collection? Did anyone use that in there?
I did, and I got some nice little stories.
Okay.
Nothing that actually made it in properly into the dissertation, but a valuable resource. I use it all the time. I love them.
Jamie and Bree, did you use the school's folklore collections at all? Yeah.
Well, similar to Aileen, I consulted it but didn't use it. But what I did have was the original school rolls for the school where most of the children of the townland would have gone to school. Ultimately, it was probably too much detail to include in the dissertation itself, but it gave some fabulous insights to the amount of days they were missing when harvesting, you know, they were taken out of school, and the ages that they went to school, things like that. It was very interesting.
I did, definitely, yeah. I was able to find a chat or an interview with a gentleman that was born about in the middle 1870s. So his parents would have been alive at the time of the eviction. And he mentioned 300 people gone from this area. And he mentioned how a particular man sold up and went off to Australia. That's how it was spelled even. And that particular child who took the testimony in the 30s, I spoke with her grandson then, and he was fascinated to find that his grandmother had taken this testimony. You know, there was a tangible link from me to him, to his grandmother, and the grandmother to someone who had oral history of the event. You know, it was interesting.
There's a great, thank you, Jamie. There's a great question there from Lynn. I think Lynn might be right here, is based in the US. Her question for all three of you is, she knows you're in Ireland, but would you have been able to do the same projects if you weren't in Ireland? Could the research that you did have all been completed online? So do you want to start?
There's only one source that I used that wasn't online, and that was the council valuation books. But you could probably have contacted them and gotten that information from them. It's just, it's not online, but they're incredibly helpful. Like at one point I found that I was missing one of the images when I was going through the stuff that I'd looked at, and I messaged them, and within a couple of hours I had a mail back with, here's the picture you're missing, and also we've updated it. So yeah, they're brilliant. So I could actually have done mine from anywhere.
I had a student in the US who needed to use those, and actually, yes, we sent a request in, and you know, sometimes it's not always instant, but they will get back to you with it. They've been digitized, a lot of them, so they're really, really helpful. And Marion there has said yes, they post the council valuation books out to you. So yeah. How about you, Jamie? Could you have done most of yours online, do you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. It was through online actually that I was able to get the Cairns family correspondence. I found somebody online and sent an email, and I'd sent 50 emails, I'd say, to different people who were looking for relatives from Australia, and one came through, and I was able to unearth a series of letters and correspondence, and that was amazing. And it was through online also that I found a solicitor's box, but that was probably one of the most exciting parts of the research, was opening that box that hadn't been opened or some of the papers hadn't been opened since the sale in the middle 1830s. So that was exciting, getting your hands on some real documents.
That's fantastic.
But online, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened only online, really.
How about you, Bríd?
Well, I did my master's completely online, and to this day, I still haven't set foot on the campus in UL. So it is doable. Completely online, partly because I wanted it to be online, but also because I graduated in 2020, so COVID lockdown. So we had no choice. So there was no libraries, nothing open to us. So luckily, everything for my study was available. So, for example, Ancestry had most things to do with migration, but it was solely online. So it is doable, very doable.
I would just like to say I did it online, but the class I had, we had a special group, I think, and the class helped an awful lot. The class interactions and it was super. Without the class, I'm not sure if I would have been able to do it. The class was most important, and the teacher, of course.
No, but one thing I would have to say is that as a group, every year, and you can speak to the students afterwards, those of you who are listening, but every year I do feel that the groups gel together very well, both, you know, online, and we do things like field trips as well, and sometimes people can make it to those, and, you know, obviously meeting people in person is great. But generally as a group, everyone is really good at chatting and engaging and sharing and helping, and, you know, it's a great dynamic. So yeah. So and Lynn says thank you there. So I think that was helpful. So are there any other questions? Because I think we might have to start moving on. We might just have to leave it there. Any questions from in the room here? No. Well, listen, we might have a bit more time at the end if anyone thinks of anything else they want to ask. But in the meantime, I would like to give a huge thank you to Aileen, to Jamie, and to Bríd for your wonderful presentations there. Great research and. So we're at just after 1:10 now. So I think we were going to have a break. I think in the interest of time, it might, if people in the room here sort of need to nip out, you can go out, there's around the corner if anyone needs to a comfort break or anything like that. But I might move on just because we have the room for a certain amount of time here. So apologies that we ran over a bit, but I think, you know, it's really great presentations there. So what I want to do now, this is the bit for anyone who might be interested to hear more about the course. So those of you who have done the course before, you maybe don't necessarily need to listen to this, although there might be questions that people that are listening would find valuable to hear your opinions rather than me talking about the course, because obviously I'm teaching on it. So I'm just going to bring up my slides now and run through that with you. Actually. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. So I just wanted, first of all, before I go into detail about the MA History of Family, I wanted to let everyone know that in the Department of History, we actually have 5 master's programmes. So people that aren't studying here at the moment, you might be interested just to know what is on offer. We have the MA History, so that would be sort of your traditional history. We have people in the audience here who are studying that at the moment. All kinds of exciting topics that people do under the MA History as well. We then have the MA Local History, that is offered every 2 years, and obviously that's looking at sort of people and place and the relationship between those two. We also do offer the MA Public History and Cultural Heritage, so that's taking another angle on history, looking at the public-facing things. So people maybe who work in museums and that sort of thing would find that course interesting. We have a new master's that I just wanted to mention to you, which is the MA in Irish and Global Conflict History. So people that are maybe interested in researching things, you know, for instance, to do with the Troubles maybe, or back as far as 1798 rebellion, all kinds of things like that would be covered under the Irish and Global Conflict History Masters, which is starting in September. And then the MA History of the Family is what I'm talking about today. But I just thought I'd show it there because just in case anyone is interested, or you know, and then you have the details, contact details there. If anyone wants me to share any of those later with them, I'm happy to do that. So the MA History of Family, it's actually a very long running course, this one. It started running in 2005, and it's always been run as an online and blended course. So it wasn't one that arose because of the pandemic. It had always been done in this way. Started off with a very basic sort of podcast, and there was no video or anything. And then as time went by, as the technology improved, and you know, and then gradually we started doing hybrid courses and things like that. It's a very flexible programme. So as we can see, what we're doing today is what we would typically be doing in the classroom. We'd have students sitting in the classroom and students online as well. This year's an exception. Everyone signed up to do the course online, but in most years we'd have a mixture of the two. So you can choose to study on campus in blended format or online, and you can also choose to study full-time in 1 year or part-time in 2 years. Hopefully, you know, the group here today, the audience today, shows this to some extent, but students come from a range of locations. So some of the places, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Ireland, UK, USA. Really, you can do the course from anywhere. You just need to have access to a computer to be able to do that. People come from a range of backgrounds as well. This is what I love about teaching the course, because everyone has such different experiences to share, which is brilliant. History, genealogy, local history, and maybe some obvious ones. Social sciences, so people who've done sociology, for instance. We have people who are presenting today who've got backgrounds in maths and business. So people come from all kinds of different backgrounds and a range of life experiences, which again, I think is really important. We have people that are new graduates who might have done a degree in history and moved on to do a master's. We have people that are working currently and, you know, want to do something different alongside of their work. We have people that are carers who maybe this is a useful course to be able to do, because you don't have to be able to leave the house if you're looking after someone. And also we have people who are retirees who think, right, I want to do something completely different now, and so they decide to do the course. And it's I find it a really enriching experience. I learn so much from my students, as well as students from each other. So I just want to briefly go through the different things that you would study if you're doing this. There are 3 modules that you attend in semester 1. There's the introduction to the history of family, where we talk about some of those topics that I introduced at the beginning of today. We also then have linking families and communities, where we look at different topics, things like education, things like religion, and how families relate to those different communities. And then there is Irish cultural history, which is taught by my colleague Niamh McGowan. And I think students always really enjoyed that course as well. For those people that are studying in person in Limerick, the Irish cultural history is an optional one, because there are other ones that are offered in person. But these are for the online people. These are the 3 modules that are offered. And in semester 1, you also start thinking about your dissertation topic, which at the very beginning of the semester people think is, you know, I'm ever going to decide what I'm going to do, but somehow people always manage to do it by the end of the semester. Then in semester 2, there's 2 modules that you attend. We have the history research seminar, which is where you start talking about what you're going to be doing for your dissertation. You start working on your dissertation topic and doing your research, and people share those in presentations. And then we also look at migration. People on the Move is the name of that particular course. And it's at this point in semester 2 that the supervision starts. Everyone is allocated a supervisor to help them with their dissertation. And then in the summer of year 1, all students, whether you're full-time or part-time, that's when you really start working on your dissertation further. If you're a part-time student, you will then have the whole of the next year to work on your dissertation. If you're a full-time student, you'll be submitting in the August of this 1 year. There is also an option that I wanted to mention to people that is new from 2024 to 5. If you don't want to do a dissertation but you've completed all of the other modules, you can exit with a graduate diploma in the history of family. So that's an option for some people. But what I think will probably happen is most people will have started their research, so hopefully will want to continue on doing that. But it is an option to be aware of. The dissertation itself is 21,000 words, plus or minus 10%, I think. So that can sound a bit daunting at first, but it's actually, we help you to do that. And so it's not as bad as it sounds, maybe. Full-time students, as I said, they submit it in August of year 1 and part-time students in August of year 2. So if anyone who's listening at the moment who's going to be signing up for this September, you would be submitting in August 2025 if you're full-time and August 2026 if you're part-time. We have a virtual learning environment. Obviously, it's really important as it's an online course that this works really well. It's a new one, so some of the alumni here will be familiar with Solus, but we now have Brightspace, and that's where all of the course material is located. So anything you need to look for, a reading, what we call an e-activity, which are little activities that you might do on a weekly basis, your discussion boards, all of that is accessed by this virtual learning environment. This is an example of what it might look like on the migration module. And then there's each week, for each of the modules that you study, there is a live seminar. It'll be in the classroom, but it's also recorded at the same time, and online students would attend in this way so that you'd all be together but in different locations. We're very lucky to have the Glucksman Library where we are at the moment for all of the books and things that you might need. This is the state of the art. This image here, this is what's known as automated reserve collection, where books are stored in those trays that you see there, and they're retrieved by this machine, and it's all computerized, and it's very state of the art. But as well as having all these physical books, we have plenty of digital materials. So all of the readings on this course, or the majority of readings, will be available to you digitally as well for online students. I've put in here helpful staff just because the staff in the library are so fantastic. If you come in, they're always ready to help. If you send them an email as an online student, they will do what they can to help you as well. So it's not just a building, it's not just the book, it's the people that work here as well. The learning spaces, it's made to be accessible as well, and all students will have access, as you can see on the slide here, to ebooks, articles, and a whole range of different databases as well that you can use. We're also very proud of our special collections and archives, and in fact the room that we're in here today is part of it's one of their rooms where they do a lot of their training. They collect and preserve rare books and also archival materials. So some of those things that we've been talking about, like letters and diaries and those kind of things, we have here. The focus is papers from Limerick and Munster, but we have ones from across Ireland as well. I think these numbers here may be a little out of date. I need to check with my colleagues, but at the last time I got the figures, it was 2,000 archive boxes and 40,000 printed works, but I'm sure we actually have much more by now, because I know we've acquired some new collections. As well as doing everything online, because I think sometimes people are a bit worried about doing an online course because they think it might not be very dynamic. You might just be sort of, just listening to something, but hopefully students will be able to say to you it's quite interactive, even though a lot of it is online. So some of the things that we've done are in person as well, transcription workshops, but we also did a transcription workshop online as well. Quite a few students here will have attended those. We've done work on crowdsourced projects. And also you have access to any of our academic research seminars. So once a week, there's normally, not once a week, but regularly, there are history research seminars between University of Limerick and Mary Immaculate College that all students are welcome to attend. And then we do field trips, and there's normally one field trip per semester. So sometimes students from overseas, they like to come over to that so they can meet their colleagues in person. You kind of gel then and know who everyone is. And then I normally find that there's even more engagement on the discussion boards after we've done the first field trip. So some of the places we've been to recently include the National Library of Ireland and the National Archives. Those are the two that we tend to always go to. And then it depends what we're focusing on each semester. We might go to the Registry of Deeds, we might go to the Tenement Museum at 14 Henrietta Street. Most recently, we went to Marshall's Library, which was fascinating as well. People always ask how much time will I spend if I'm doing this course. Again, that's maybe something to ask our students, but there's a certain amount of time allocated to seminars and online study. When you look in the module there, we normally say 12 hours a week would be around what you're thinking of, but most people end up spending a lot more time than that. Partly because I think hopefully people enjoy doing their research, and so when they can, they try to do that. And you do need to allow a bit of time for your own sort of reading and writing and so on. I'm just putting this here quickly, and Una might also put that in the chat for anyone that's interested. So there's more information on our website in terms of the online course and the in-person course. Just very briefly, I wanted to go through the fees here. So the fees are different depending on whether you're full-time or part-time, whether you're based in the EU or you're non-EU, and whether you're doing the blended or the online course. So this is if you're doing this in person, these are the fees for that blended course. And then if you're studying online, these are the fees for the online course. Okay. And again, those are on the website if you go to those links. If anyone's interested in applying, just very briefly, what you need to do is get digital copies of your transcripts for your qualifications. If English isn't your first language, you need evidence that that you have a language qualification. And if you happen to have transcripts that aren't in English, you need to then get them translated, certified translations, as well as a copy of your birth certificate. And then just to apply, those links that we'll be putting there for you, you just go there, click on the links, and then you can sign up there. What I would say though is I'm always really happy for people to email me and to have a chat if anyone's interested in doing the course. So do feel free to get in touch if it's something that you're thinking about. So I'll just leave it there for the moment. If there's any questions anyone has about any of that, please feel free to ask in the chat, or I don't think anyone in the classroom is probably going to. Oh, you have, yes.
A quick one, just
yes.
To the contact hours for the seminar.
Yes, yeah. So the seminars, so I suppose if you're doing it in person, if you look on the timetable there, it normally says 3 hours for a seminar in person. What I tend to do is take that as contact time, including maybe recorded videos, because if you're doing a whole day, normally these modules are held on the same day. It's normally on a Thursday, and so that would mean maybe 6 hours of online, which I think is a bit too much for anyone. So what we tend to do is have 1 hour live online session for each of the modules, and then there might be some video recordings that you watch back in your own time. So what I think happens as a result of this is you end up working your way through, step by step, what you need to do. One thing will be a live seminar. And then the other, if you like, contact hours might be, asynchronous rather than synchronous. Does that make sense? Yeah. I'm just going to close this down and see if there's any other questions that we have. What time of day? That's a good question. We often get students, because obviously, if you're based in Australia or based in the States, the time zone can be an issue. The core hours are between 9 and 5 Irish time. What I would say is normally one of the seminars is in the morning, one's in the afternoon. So if you're in Australia or if you're in America, you should normally be able to attend at least one of the sessions live. This year it's been fully online. All of our students have been online. So what I was able to do is look at all of the time zones and try to come up with a time that would work pretty much for everyone. New Zealand can be quite different. New Zealand and America is very, very difficult to manage. But we've actually done it so that a few times when our Australian and New Zealand colleagues have been presenting, we've done a bespoke one and people have gone to a 9 o'clock in the morning presentation from them. So I do try to work around it as much as we can. But when we're doing a blended course where some people are in the classroom and some are online, we normally have to work between those 9 to 5 hours. There's a question there about the deposit. I don't know, Una, you might be able to answer that. Una,
that would be an acceptance. So yeah, once you accept your place, you pay that €250, but you wouldn't have that at the application stage, let's say. So yeah, that would be further on in your journey, I suppose, and that's set against the fees. Yeah, that would be taken out of your fee schedule or your fee amount as well. But it's just to ensure, I suppose, to confirm that you're accepting your place and that sort of thing, and to keep your place as well. So is that okay, Rachel?
Yes, that's great. Thank you. And Michael saying thank you there as well. So I think that's great.
I've just put in some useful information there just on funding your postgrad, claiming tax relief, which is up as 20% of your fees, and it's up to €7,000. It's for people who are obviously in the system in Ireland, you know, so it wouldn't really apply to non-EU students. Will apply to people resident in Ireland and that sort of thing. We're in the social security system here, but just to put those kind of resources up as well as some information for non-EU students, international students as well.
Do you know the answer to that question, Una?
Yeah, so it depends on how long their residence, and I'll actually put there is a graph. It can be complex if people are citizens of other countries but resident in the EU. So I'll actually pop a link in there because it gives you the graph of how you qualify. So I'll pop that in there for Kate, and I can speak to her offline as well. But it really depends on how long you've been resident in an EU country and that sort of information. So it might be better offline, Rachel, to answer that question. But I'll pop that graph in as well.
Yeah. And like I say, if anyone has any questions that you want to ask either me or Una, feel free to send an email. And I can I'll put mine here as well if you want it.
Yeah, that's why there is the graph, Michael, because yeah, the UK is kind of a special case at the moment for both I think political reasons as well, and given you know, I suppose our relationship with Northern Ireland as well, and how we class students that way as well. So I'll put that in for you as well. Actually, it will apply to you too, Michael. So I can speak to you offline as well. It can be complex to figure all that out actually, when people are resident in one area and they're coming from a different country, or they're non-EU students. So I'll pop that in there for everyone there.
Okay. Thank you, Una.
Is that okay?
So again, I'm just conscious of the time, and what we might do is we might start the next session now, and there is time built in for further questions afterwards. So if you have any questions about the course, you know, you can ask those at the end as well. Okay. So what we're going to do now is a section called Beyond the MA History of Family, where we will be talking to 4 graduates of the History of Family and about what they did afterwards. I don't know, would you like to come up to the front, Helena and Cora, would you like to come up? And I think everyone else is online. So we have Michael and we have John as well. So I think what I'm going to do just very quickly is open up those slides for you there. Yes. So the first person that is going to be talking to us today is, and you feel free to sit down if you want, is Helena, and she is originally from Germany, and she completed her undergraduate degree in English and History here at the University of Limerick in 2019, and then she graduated with her Masters in the History of Family from Limerick as well in 2020. She did a fantastic MA dissertation which focused on the concepts of childhood, parenthood and family in the Irish Free State. A paper that emanated from her Masters was awarded the McCurtain Cullen Prize in Irish Women's History in 2021, and that was from the Women's History Association of Ireland. Building on her Masters research, Helena commenced a PhD in History in 2020 in UL, examining the treatment of children in Irish Free State society. Her areas of interest include the history of childhood, medical history, and the history of crime and punishment, and how these areas of research overlap.
Sorry, Jill. Do we just do my slides?
Yes, that's fine. Do you want me to share them?
So yeah, just wanted to briefly talk about, I suppose, what happens if you decide to go on with your academic research because you didn't feel you had enough space to deal with that in your MA thesis, which I think a lot of us felt like. My MA, as Rachel said, I started in 2019 and I finished in 2020. And it was on constructions of childhood, parenthood and the family in the Irish Free State, 1922 to 32. My supervisor was Dr. Rachel Murphy, which I was very fortunate to get that experience. And really the MA dissertation topic came out of an interest in an article that was on the mandatory reading list for one of our, I think the community module. And it talked about child abuse and how there's a lot of research on institutional child abuse in Ireland for obvious reasons and very valuable research, but that we're lacking understanding of the position of children in Irish Free State or in Irish history in general, outside of institutional setting studies. So I was interested in exploring that sort of thematic, and I sort of approached it by trying to understand how middle classes were sort of in charge of making laws in Ireland in the 20th century, conceptualized the family, parenthood and childhood really. And going on from that, then my PhD investigates the treatment of children in Irish Free State society, but it is based on actually the same question. I'm still interested in understanding how are children treated outside of institutional settings, because I believe it is a core element of understanding institutional child abuse that did not exist in isolation from children in Irish society. So the title now is Children, Class and Irish Social Life, 1922 to 49. And my supervisors are Dr. Ciara Brannock and Dr. Sorcha de Brún. And in the following slides, I just wanted to show how sort of you can see the PhD being born out of the MA. So here my research question for the MA, and they included how did the middle classes view working class children? How did the middle classes view working class children and their families, and how were children expected to behave? What was the ideal boy or girl like? How were parents supposed to behave? And what was the ideal parent like? And now, as you can see, my first research question for the PhD sort of encapsulates all of those questions by asking how were poor children, young people and their parents conceptualized by the middle classes in Irish Free State. And then expanding on that, I'm now looking at how were poor children and young people viewed and treated by their parents, family and their wider communities, and how middle class attitudes and violences towards poor children and their families affect their treatment in the Irish newspapers and court system. And in terms of methodology, my MA was a case study of Limerick from 1922 to 32, and it looked at newspapers as primary sources, historical newspapers, this is of course, and it was based on a one-dimensional theoretical framework, mostly situated in history of the family, sentiments approach. And I used a data set and a keyword search strategy, and then applied a close reading approach to my primary sources. And as you can see, the PhD really picks up a lot of those elements. So obviously I've expanded the scope of the study to look at Irish Free State in its whole from 22 to 49 and for the entire Republic, well, Irish Free State, not Republic, sorry, of Ireland. I'm looking at historical newspapers and have augmented that by also looking at historical court records. And now I'm using a tripartite theoretical approach that encompasses gender, class, and childhood. And I'm still using a data set and keyword search strategy and also close reading approach. So you can really see how the MA helped me to set up my PhD. And really what I wanted to show with those slides was to illustrate that the MA is a fantastic way of sort of test driving your academic research interests and abilities and test out your methodology, develop that further. You can identify sort of difficulties, both with sources and with your methodology, but also for you personally, which parts do you find really difficult about writing? Is it a conclusion? Is it an introduction? Is it structuring? You can familiarize yourself with the historiography. So thanks to the brilliant work of Rachel, I already knew a lot of the secondary sources that I needed for my PhD as well. So I didn't start from scratch. I kind of knew already where I was going and who were the big players in the field. And the same for the primary sources. I already had worked with the Irish newspaper archives online. I had identified sort of the best search strategies, and I could correct a few things for my PhD. That's particularly important for historians because we all know when we are getting excited about a primary source and then we view that in person, say in an archive, and we figure out that they don't actually contain any of the information we thought they would, or they're very difficult to use or to digitize, or all of those things you can figure out already with your MA. And then you can cover more ground, which is great if you're really interested in your research, if you're excited about it. So you can see how I really augmented all my methodology and scope. You can gain confidence in your planning and writing skills, because for me personally, that was the first big research-based writing project I ever undertook. And I could kind of, test how good I am timekeeping, planning, project managing. And in the same vein, it's a really great opportunity to learn how to work with an academic supervisor and how that relationships can work. What do you have to do? What is your supervisor expected to do for you? And I was very fortunate that I had a great supervisor who was really supportive, especially in the context of COVID and contingency. So that can be very helpful, especially if maybe your MA supervisor can go on to be your PhD supervisor. That might not work in our project, unfortunately, but in the MA history of the family, but it can in general just really help to test out all of those issues before. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
So I think that, and as you can see, she was always excellent at keeping to the time, and a very organised person to supervise. And the one thing that I always remember about Helena is the fact that you had a set of records you wanted to look at, didn't you? And then the pandemic struck, and we had to have a meeting and say, okay, what are we going to do? As you say, is the contingency. And she was just so unflappable about the whole thing, very organised and brilliant. So really
you being the unflappable one.
But it's great. It's always lovely to see students come back and either go on and do a PhD or go and study something else. It's always lovely to have people come back to Limerick, and we do find that happens quite a lot. There's obviously something about the community here, so yeah. But I'm sure there'll be some questions for you afterwards. I know we in the audience, as well as people that just interested in the history of family in general, we have people that are current history of family students and alumni as well that maybe are thinking of going on to do a PhD. So I'm sure there'll be some questions for you in a minute, Helena. I think next we're going to have a chat with Michael. And I'm sorry, these are very short. They're 7 minutes each, so it's very short. You can open out to questions. Michael graduated in his History of Family Masters in January 2023. He previously completed a BA in History, Politics, Sociology and Social Studies here at the University of Limerick. And then to expand on his enthusiasm for family history, he set up Past Links genealogy services in 2020 to help people discover more about their family past. I'm going to let him maybe talk a little bit more about that, because I know he's going to go through that with us. But he resides in Nenagh. He's from Tipperary. He's head of a committee that is actively campaigning to turn Nenagh Military Barracks into a museum with multi-communal use. He's worked for the past 9 months as a clerical officer with the court service at Nenagh Courthouse. So Michael is one of the people who, he did his degree, he went on and did his master's, and now he's embarking on his career as a clerical officer as well. So I think, Michael, what I might do is I might just hand over to you there, because I know you're going to talk about some of the other activities you've been doing. So I'll let you speak to those now. But thank you very much, Michael.
So good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to say, first of all, thanks to Rachel for having me here today. I'm really looking forward to talking to you all. So firstly, just start off just briefly about what I did with the in college. So I did my dissertation involving research in this particular family, looking into the military history of Nenagh, and that was the Hennessy's. And sorry, can everyone see this okay?
You might want to, is it on the full screen? Are you able to put it onto that, Michael?
Yes,
at the very bottom. Can you see it at the very bottom of your screen, that little full screen thing?
Yeah.
Someone's saying press F5. It may be in the interest of time. I mean,
Yeah.
Can everyone see that? Okay, maybe if you want to just carry on, I think maybe Michael, but that's great. We can see it anyway. That's okay.
Yeah, apologies, everyone. So I did my dissertation on this family from Nenagh called the Hennessy's, who lived at the barracks, and examining their life as a military family, looking to see if they were your atypical military family or not. And I was very lucky to have the late Professor Jan Plamper and also Dr. Dave Fleming to supervise this dissertation, and essentially looked at could this family be applied into the sphere of Irish history and how their lives were impacted by events in Irish and military history. And it looked into different areas such as the Victorian era. It then moved on to the First World War, following then with the Irish conflict and how it impacted Irish ex-soldiers. And the third section looked at their lives in the Irish Free State and in the United Kingdom, post-colonial rule, and also that third generation of military service. And it was just really interesting into looking into this family. And since then, doing that, I kind of found that despite the personal tragedies that this family suffered, overall life in the army was very beneficial for the Hennessy's, and it actually probably saved them from a life of poverty and hardship. And I was able to use this dissertation into further studies. This course allowed me to look into things such as carrying out further research, the type of sources that I used, and I was able to even get this published in the Tipperary Historical Journal. I was able to give talks via Zoom to Australian Genealogical Society and get published in the quarterly magazine Ancestor, which looked into the types of sources that might exist for Nenagh military history. And then after doing this, well, one thing I really enjoyed doing as part of this course was the data burial entry projects. And this was great. We've seen how to go about transcribing and doing research. And one thing I decided to look into, particularly the last few months, was in Garda genealogy. And this was because of helping write a chapter about the history of Teppermore Garda College history, which was published in the Guardian's book in 2022. And particularly noticing the fact that the UCD have digitized the Civil Guard register from 22 to 25, but it was not actually searchable. So over the last couple of months, along with a couple of dozen volunteers, we actually have transcribed all 6,500 names from that register. And one of my reasons for looking into the register was the fact that my own great-grandfather, Michael Corrie, who came from County Clare, joined the Civil Guard in 24. And this just gives you an example of what the register looks like on the website Policing Genealogy Ireland, where it gives you all the transcription from the Civil Guard register. And it also gives the opportunity to add in additional information such as genealogical and also even photographs of people's ancestors who served. And this is just the example here of Michael Corrie's service in the Guards, where he was stationed in Kiltimagh, County Mayo for 30 years. And also just the idea that Gardaí is a very important part of Irish social and kind of cultural history, even to this day, that many people across Ireland have some sort of connection to this being a very vibrant part of the town life. And the thing is, when you do this course, History of Family, can you get a career out of this? And the great thing is, with the kind of skills you learn from this course, you can. So 9 months ago, actually this week, I started working for the court service, being assigned to Nenagh in County Tipperary, where I live. And essentially, I'm a clerical officer in the courthouse, where I'm involved with Nenagh and Thurles districts. Part of my role includes helping to prepare court cases. It involves dealing with members of the public and also doing things such as data entry, which is something I learned from doing History of the Family. It also involves a lot of teamwork with people, having worked like closely with people in History of the Family, and particularly giving me that communication skills to deal with members of the public, whether it be by phone, is it by email, or even at person. And I also had the great benefit, the fact that the courthouse just last month is 180 years old, and actually looking into its history, just having an interest in genealogy and history, looking into the courthouse as it's part of Nenagh Historic Quarter. And when they actually discovered that I'd done an MA in history of the family, they actually asked me on my first day, would I be interested in taking over as the designated historian and guide for the courthouse? And that's something I've actually been doing over the last couple of months. And even this month, I'm having school tours in for a tour of the courthouse, where they even have the opportunity to do mock trials there. And it's been a great experience working the courts, and I continue to really enjoy it, and hopefully as well I continue to do so, and also just that there's a great career from all the skills you can do from doing history of the family. So apologies again about the slight complications, and I just want to say thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I think it's fabulous to see, how you managed to bring all those strands together. Michael has always been, enthusiastic in all those different areas of history, the local history and the Garda history, as well as genealogy. And I think it's fantastic that, you've started this career for yourself because of the skills that you learned in the MA History of Family, but also the fact that they've recognised your skills as a historian and, carved out a bit of your role to do the historical side of things. So it's fabulous. Well done, Michael. I'm really pleased with that. So I'm going to move very swiftly on to Padraig Hogan, who's going to talk a little bit about what he did as well. And there'll be questions as well for you, I'm sure, Michael, at the end. So Padraig was born in Bury, County Limerick, but he now lives in County Meath. He graduated from the University of Limerick in 1986 with a BEng in electronics, and he worked in the IT sector for 35 years. To further his ongoing interest in family and local history, in 2018, he completed a certificate in genealogy at the University of Limerick. In 2019, he went on to complete a diploma in genealogy at University College Cork. And then in 2020, he came back to Limerick to complete his MA in the history of family. He's currently working as a genealogical researcher in the probate field. He's had papers published in the Irish Genealogist and the UL History Journal. And since completing the MA, he's also contributed to the History Show and the Doc on One on RTE Radio, as well as participating in a feature on News Talk Radio, where he discussed the basics of family tree creation. So Padraig, I'll hand over to you now.
Just like to start with thanking Rachel for the opportunity to speak to you today. So I'm going to discuss my recent career change from being a software development manager in IBM to being a genealogical researcher, which by no stretch of the imagination is an obvious career path. As Rachel said, I graduated from UL in 1986 with a BEng in electronics, and I worked in the IT sector for 35 years, which sounds like a really long time. And for the last 5 years, I really felt was far too long. So I was looking for something else, and I wasn't sure what, but I had a big interest in history, and I had done a lot of work on my own family tree. So when I saw the certificate in genealogy at UL, I was very attracted to it. I started doing that, and within probably a few weeks, I knew that's what I wanted to do, either as continuing education or as a job. Immediately followed that up with the diploma. And when that was done, the MA in History of Family seemed like a very obvious next step. I had just signed up for that and paid over the fee when I saw an advertisement for a job from a company called Aaron International. They were looking for people interested in genealogy. I went and had a chat with them, and they were very interested in offering me some work. But I couldn't afford to quit my job in IT, and I was just after signing up for the Masters. So they agreed I would do very limited casework for them as much as I could in my spare time. So I just did maybe one case every month until the MA work became and then COVID happened as well. So I stopped for about 6 months. Finished the MA, and fortunately I was able to get a redundancy package from my company, and that enabled me to do a lot more work for Éireann. So since 2021, I've been working on quite a lot of cases for them, 5 to 6 at a time. It's not full time, but it's close enough to it. So what we do is I work mainly with the legal profession. It's probate, genealogy. We try to trace the beneficiaries of intestate estates. You might have seen a program called Heir Hunters on television. Some of the cases are very like that. The interesting ones that we compete with other companies, it's pretty much round the clock. We have to get to find the relevant relatives as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of late nights and coffee involved. But we also do a lot of more standard work, just verification of family trees for the legal profession, mainly to do with wills again, and also maybe looking for the individuals mentioned on land registrations. Typically, you'll have an old farm or an old house that has now, the title deeds have never been signed over, and the person named on the title deed might be a grandfather or a great-grandfather or even a great-great-grandfather. And we'll be engaged to try and find out who that person is and who their relatives are. And as I say, some simple family tree verifications as well, although I would say 3 out of 4 family trees that we receive from families tend to be incorrect. Not that they've got the wrong people on them, but they're missing people, that an uncle that went to America or a granduncle or something like that. So typically the work involves a lot of the usual online ancestry, all of those genealogical tools, visits to the GRO, Valuation Office, National Archives, Land Registry, just newspaper archives, anything really. When we do find people, we then tend to have to trace the relatives. So that would possibly involve some creative phone calls or social media, or again, the newspapers. And on top of that, I also do some private work, just word of mouth from people that have either contacted Éireann asking if we do family trees, or just friends and family, or, I get some recommendations from those sources. It isn't all just research, though. As Rachel mentioned, I have had the lucky opportunity to do some work for RTE Radio. One of those was directly related to my my master's dissertation, and some of the other work came through Éireann. It was different. I never envisaged myself doing it, but I'd love to do some more if the opportunity arises. So basically, that's it. I'm delighted that I made the career change. I'm absolutely certain that the MA in the history of family was a critical part of that, and I would echo some of the other contributors who said it was the best decision they ever made to that course. So I would agree with that. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you. That's it. I'll take any questions later. Okay.
Thanks very much, Padraig. And I remember we were chatting, I was supervising him, and we were chatting, and you were saying that that's something that you really dreamt of being able to do. And so it's just wonderful to see you kind of fulfilling your ambitions to be able to do that. Wonderful stuff. So finally, last but not least, we have John O'Brien, who's going to talk to us about getting published. Now, I know other people here have been published as well. We're hearing lots of publications, but John's going to talk to us a little bit about that aspect of what he's done after his master's. So John was brought up near Ballymore Eustace in County Kildare. He studied maths, so he's the mathematician I was talking about, in Trinity College Dublin, before working in the investment industry and lecturing part-time to postgraduates in Dublin, where he lives with his wife and 2 children. In 2022, John completed a Master's in History of Family in the University of Limerick, having previously completed a certificate in local history at Maynooth University. His historical interests include the Dingle Peninsula, early tennis in Dublin, and the remarkable townland of Harristown in County Kildare, which hosted the Eustace and Latouche families, a Rotten borough, and a station on the Sallins-Tullow branch railway line. He's presented to a wide variety of historical societies and interest groups on all of these topics, including various Heritage Week events and the Dublin Festival of History. In 2022, he authored and compiled a centenary book for Ashbrook Lawn Tennis Club in Rathgar, and since completing the Masters, he's contributed articles to the Journal of the West Wicklow Historical Society, the Journal of the Irish Railway Record Society, and History Ireland. So John, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Rachel. And I was a bit silly in that had I kind of thought properly through this, I would have realized, well, if I'm going to be talking about publications, I shouldn't put those publications into my biography, but there we go. So I started doing the MA in 2021. I kind of initially was planning on doing it part-time, but moved to doing it full-time, even though I do work full-time in what I would describe as a pretty brutal industry, and one that works people very hard, pays them well, but kind of spits them out once they turn 50. And really what I wanted to do in doing the program was kind of get myself into a position where I would have a lot of kind of flexibility, if you like, to use a good, credible skill set, you know, potentially in my 50s or in my 60s, or whenever kind of the inevitable kind of tap on the shoulder comes, or whenever so that's really why I kind of did the course in the first place. I'll just share a screen very quickly and run through a few quick slides here. So hopefully you can see that. In essence, my thesis was on the part of the country where my mother comes from. So specifically, and a lot of parallels with what Breed was talking about earlier, but a lot of differences, I think, as well. My thesis title was Household Formation within the Farming Cloghauns of West Kerry in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So a cloghauns essentially is a cluster of houses. There were around about 130 of these and a population of around about 13,000 at famine times, which kind of fell to about 7,000 or 8,000 by the turn of the century. And this was essentially how the entirety of the population was configured in that part of the country. You know, Rachel kind of spoke earlier about some kind of broader demographic themes, and you know, if you look at Europe, there have been kind of studies of household formation, marriage patterns, inheritance patterns, and so on. And Ireland in particular, you know, was kind of a little bit of an exception maybe to some of what happened in Western Europe. But even within Ireland, there are kind of a lot of different kind of parts of the country where, you know, perhaps because it was at the very tail end of a kind of a diffusion pattern around social change or whatever, things were a little different. So essentially what I was really doing was kind of drawing on what I would have seen kind of growing up in the late 70s and early 80s in West Kerry, where, you know, STEM family organization and 3-generation families were simply every household was configured like that, but really just to look at how unique was this area, and in a kind of a part of where it could be measured. So very interesting. I won't really go through what I did, but it was quite a, you know, because I'm a mathematician, I guess, by training, it was quite a statistical study, but I had a lot of kind of groundwork to do, a lot of kind of interesting work in transcribing census. You can see some of the kinds of things I had to deal with, which, you know, most of the census returns in that area, you know, have not yet been transcribed. They're not on the census website. I took a variety of different statistical approaches then, and concluded in essence that, you know, there was a clear case of a time and a place and a kind of a cohort where STEM family organization was near universal. But at the same time, quite a lot of kind of interesting peculiarities just about how it operated in West Kerry versus other places as well. And some kind of, Rachel mentioned earlier, you know, gender lenses and so on. And that was quite interesting, just kind of casting a gender lens on how STEM family organization operated. So that's in essence what my thesis was about. But hopefully, sorry, slides are moving in line. Yeah, I think they are. But because of the other courses, again, you know, Rachel mentioned Irish cultural history, migration, some of the other modules, you know, you end up creating quite a lot of good, you know, what in the kind of marketing world would be described as an asset or collateral, but in essence, good kind of well thought out, well kind of researched essays on different areas. And you know, perhaps it's kind of a good idea to kind of focus on areas that are a little bit different from the main thesis topic. So, you know, when I was doing the MA, I kind of did work on as part of the Irish Cultural History module, I did an essay on gender, nationality and early tennis in Ireland. Also work on railway advertising. I did work on through the migration module, looking at the railway station master's house that I grew up in, and kind of using that as a case study for looking at how railway employment contributed to the kind of internal migration in Ireland that accelerated in the late 19th century. We did an awful lot of other kind of things that threw out a lot of kind of interesting, like Rachel mentioned the e-tivities earlier. This would be kind of weekly, maybe 300 to 500 word kind of articles on various different topics. So you develop a huge amount of what again in the marketing world would be described as assets through carrying out the program, and of course the thesis itself being the most important of those. So since I finished, I kind of immediately got to work in seeing, what was an interesting kind of place, where might it be interesting to kind of try and place some of the materials that I had worked on. And the March-April edition of History Ireland this year essentially had a kind of a repurposed, it was kind of repurposed for the nature of the publication, but in essence that is, it really was the work I had done on women in early tennis in Ireland. Then the work that I had done as part of the migration module, I kind of repurposed that twice, and it kind of appeared in the Journal of the West Wicklow Historical Society last year, and then in the Irish Railway Records Society, who are quite interested in this type of an article because they've worked with Ancestry.com to digitize the railway employment records and are quite keen to almost pivot from kind of a journal which historically was all about engine specifications and things like that to one that is much more about social history. And the other kind of big piece I've worked on, which I kind of finished shortly after doing the masters, was a centenary book for a tennis club in Dublin, and plenty of kind of stuff in train at the moment. Probably the one piece that's missing there is the thesis itself. I kind of have a little bit of thinking to do, I guess, about how best to use that, but that will happen in time. But just by way of kind of how the MA really helped in getting published, there's a lot of kind of aspects to this, and I think it's not all about the content and the actual your research findings per se. There's an awful lot of other kind of aspects to getting published as well, and the program does a fantastic job of kind of going through all aspects of what it involves, whether it's kind of serious academic journals or on the other end of the spectrum, if it's Ireland's Own or something like that you wanted to get published in, the kind of process around how to do that is very well covered in the program. And that includes, the approach to structuring an argument, kind of building a kind of an interesting essay on top of a piece of research, understanding sources, understanding their limitations, their value. Just kind of positioning works, and Rachel mentioned this at the very outset as well, is, it's all well and good, I had such and such an ancestor who did this, that, and the other, but, how do you kind of position their experience within a kind of a wider and make that kind of interesting to an audience that isn't, your cousins, essentially. Writing discipline, I think there's very kind of strong focus in the program as well, in that, working with word count limit. This is very, very important in the kind of publishing world, is kind of been operating to the standards that are expected within a particular kind of publication, understanding copyright, understanding citation, how to kind of handle imagery and so on, and the editorial process. But so these are all kind of very well covered, I would say, in the program. But the other kind of two aspects, I think, which are very, very important as well, and great to hear others that went through the process in other years, kind of talking about what a great kind of support network they had. And like Aileen was in my year, as was Michael, and you develop a fantastic network, both of academics, but also those that are working on the program with you, who are enormously useful when it comes to making the contacts needed in order to get material published. And the other thing I found as well is the reputation of the program. It's a great door opener. If you go to History Ireland or something like that and say, look, I have an essay on this, and I'm conscious I need to repurpose it. It was developed because of through work that I did on this program. You've half the work done in essentially kind of getting the credibility that an unknown person, not an established historian, might need in order to get there. So, I had an enormously positive experience of the program, and so far so good. On a little bit of a roll, just kind of using those assets, and but lots more to do. But the skill set developed through the program has been absolutely fantastic in kind of getting me on a publication role. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, John, as well. And I think it's great. There's so much written work that you all do as part of the programme that it's wonderful to see it being used in that way. So maybe some people that are on the call or in the audience here that haven't published anything yet, when you finish, that's something that maybe you could think of doing with the work that you did. What I'm going to do now is just open out to questions. So if you have any questions, but Helena, if anyone's thinking of doing a PhD or wants to ask any questions about that, anything that you might want to ask Michael or Pádraig or John, I know some of those people have also published as well, or indeed for any of the rest of the group. So we have students on the call, we have students online. So if anyone who's not a student would like to ask them any questions, feel free to do that as well. I'll just see, I don't know, Una, are there any questions that arose?
Yeah, there's one question there from Kathy. Is it possible to do a PhD online at UL with visits to Ireland once a year? I don't know if you want to take that, Rachel, or anyone, Helena, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, do you want to?
I know that.
Actually, you want to come over here, so you need the microphone. You too. Sorry, yeah, then we can hear
you. I know that in my PhD course, so I'm not Dr. Burnet's only a PhD student, or at least I wasn't when I started. There were quite a few students who would have done the MA History of the Family, and they would have done that online. One of my colleagues is actually based in Canada, so there's definitely a lot of flexibility around your PhD supervision, especially after COVID. I think that has changed a lot of how we work. I suppose what you have to keep in mind is sort of what sources you want to use and are they accessible from where you are. But I think PhD supervision can be done online, and I would say that there's a lot of flexibility within the history department, particularly in doing that. Would you agree?
Well, I think also that the student in question had done the MA here as well, and so she knew the supervisor and probably wanted to carry on working with the supervisors. That was part of it, because I do think when you're deciding to do a PhD, the supervisor is really important. You need to make sure you find the right person to work with, someone who's A, an expert in the subject that you're doing, but B, is someone that you can get on with, because you're in this for the long haul, aren't you? And you might want to talk about this a bit more, Helena. But
it's a very close relationship. For lack of a better word, it is, and you have to. I suppose there's also kind of base case where I suppose you would approach your intended supervisor and ask them, what is possible, what isn't possible. I'm planning on doing a lot of this online. Is that a possibility? Would that work with our supervision? But yeah, definitely it should go into your folder for questions to ask potential supervisors, I think.
Pauline, you've got a question.
Just a quick question. From the point of view of time frame for a PhD, is it open-ended, or do you have, how long has it taken you to do yours, for example?
Can we just repeat the question there? So the question was asking about the time frame for a PhD. Is it open-ended, or is there a set time that you should complete it in? So
I suppose the standard time is usually 4 years. Now it can be done in 3, and I hopefully will do it in 3. I took 1 year maternity leave, so that would be 4 years really, but the study time was 3 years. But I know of colleagues you can extend, and UL offers you the opportunity to extend after 4 years. So I suppose what most people envision is like within 4 years, but you certainly can extend for good reasons. You have to pass progression panels throughout the PhD. So you're going to have to prove continuous process, but certainly sometimes, especially with COVID, with personal reasons, whatever, there are cases in which it makes sense to extend your PhD. Yeah.
I think, in the past you would hear of people that spent, 30 years working on a PhD or something like that. So the university doesn't want people to be doing that. It's a bit sad. But certainly, to your point, I think, there's going to be flexibility there.
And I do also know that the fees that you're paying, so after 4 years of paying the full fees, you're only paying extension fees. So again, the thought is that it's 4 years, but after that, you would certainly have a bit of flexibility when you're not really making it for it.
James has his hand up there, Rachel.
James,
to interject.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Helene. My question is about the feasibility or possibility of doing a PhD across departments.
Yeah. So you mean co-supervision? Is that what you're asking?
Well, like, I'm interested in history, obviously, but I'm also interested in modern migration, social exclusion, equality. You know, how would you work with something like that?
Do you want to leave it first?
I do know of, I suppose when you're doing a PhD, you're always sort of covering more than one, like I'm doing a PhD in history, but I'm certainly also doing a lot of, I suppose, crime and punishment, because I'm looking at child abuse. So certainly it can be really helpful to have co-supervisors from different departments, and it is an opportunity. I suppose, again, it depends on you to kind of approach supervisors and to ask them, are there opportunities to kind of bridge a research topic? But certainly I know it's done. I have a co-supervisor who is actually from the Irish language research side, but she is an expert also on Irish masculinities and Irish culture history. So her expertise really adds another really significant perspective to my research. And I know I have friends who have two of co-supervisors from the history department, within the history department. So I do not know particularly how common it is to have supervisors from 2 different departments, but I certainly do. So I know it is a possibility, but I think, again, Rachel, you might be able to expand.
Yeah, I mean, it is possible. I think the thing is, if you have an idea, it's great to sort of get the concept written down and then contact someone in the university saying, you know, I've got this idea, what's going to be possible. I don't know if Carol Malani Dignam is on the call. I saw she was there at one point, so she might be here still. But I know, for instance, she had a PhD student who was recently conferred. Carol's in the Department of History, but the other supervisor was in the Department of Music. So, you know, they can be quite different. So to be honest, I don't see any reason why you couldn't do something where there's an expert in migration, expert in history, or, you know, whatever aspects you feel, you know. What I would say is think about the expertise that you need to draw on, who has those expertise, and then, you know, maybe there's something that can be put together. And it's very valuable, as Helena says, I think, you know, having people that have expertise in 2 different areas, because then you're benefiting from both of their experience. So I don't see that as an issue at all. I think your idea sounds like a great concept. So I would certainly be interested to see, you know, see you fleshing out those ideas and then see what you can do with it. Yeah.
But I do think you're right, Rachel, that a lot of, if you're thinking about doing a PhD, sitting down and writing down your idea, the sources maybe that you're trying, or that you will mainly use, and then draw, I suppose, the skill set stuff you want to develop and the expertise you need to develop them. And then from there, you can go into different institutions and look at supervisors and contact them. I think that is really good.
I think that's the right approach to take. Normally, you know, if someone comes to me after doing the MA and says, I'd like to go and do a PhD, what I would normally say is, you know, go and take a look at something like the Irish Research Council website, or, you know, one of these funders, and see, when they ask you to complete a form with a proposal, what kind of questions are they asking you to answer, and use that as a framework for writing together a research proposal. There's all kinds of websites you can go to look up research proposal. So write up your own proposal and then go to the person you think that would be good at supervising you and say, look, here's my idea, or email it to them, here's my idea, I'd love to have a chat about it. And then that's kind of opens up the conversation, I think, doesn't it? So
and they recommend as well, I think, as in someone might say, right, I can do this part, but I think for this part, we might look at getting a co-supervisor, or look, I actually also worked on this, so I'm confident I can cover everything for you. So yeah, I think that is a good approach.
Yeah. I think it's great, you know, you've got the example of the 2 supervisors there, and that obviously works really well for you as well.
Also double the feedback though, which is great, but also needs double the work.
But that's something that I think is quite interesting in terms of them working together, because, you know, you don't want to have conflicting information either. So
that's what I think
that you work as a team. Yeah.
And to take the lead from your main, or like your primary supervisor, I suppose, because if you are suggesting, oh, you know, I found this other incredible scholar, and they're like, yeah, well, we don't talk you know, that's probably not good setup.
So any other questions there at all? Jamie, is that your hand up again? There was that from before? No, okay.
There doesn't
oh,
seem
yes,
to
this
be
is another question, is it?
No, I think it's just
No,
James.
no, okay,
again.
that's all right.
Just to say, Rachel, I've just popped in some information there on applying the PhD application process, just from our own faculty website. And I think what we might do after this for the in-person attendees is we send an email to everyone, so everyone has the information to hand via email as well.
Yeah, we'll do that. That would be great. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions about any other aspect of today, please feel free to ask those now. Otherwise, it has been quite a long session, but hopefully you've all enjoyed it and it's been helpful. So I suppose just to close, I'd really like to say thank you so much to all of our fantastic presenters today. It's always wonderful having people coming back, you know, who've been through the process. I know at the moment our master's students are at, you'll remember this stage, everyone, where you're, you know, you've submitted the introduction and you're, you know, starting on your next chapter. So that's the stage everyone's at the moment. So it's wonderful to see you coming back, having been through the process, having graduated and seeing what you're all doing next and hearing about your research. I'd like to say a really big thank you to everyone who's joined us. You know, we've got people from Limerick as part of the Lifelong Learning Festival. We've got students, undergraduates, graduates, and people who are just interested in the history of family or possibly interested in the course. So thank you for joining us. And like I say, feel free to get in touch at any point if anyone has any questions, if I can be of help, or any of my colleagues can be of help as well. I'd finally like to say a really big thank you to Una, who has been fantastic in helping out with all of the online stuff. She's a great colleague to work with, and you know, I'm sure you will all interact with Una as well, you know, at various different stages. So thank you, Una, for all of your help too. Oh, there are a couple of questions here. We might just go to this if it's all right, Helena. Have you been in contact with the ISPCC and their archive? We still have a few minutes, so we've got till past. So if you don't mind, we might as well.
The ISPCC, I did contact them at the beginning actually of my MA, which goes back to my point that it's a great way of testing what access to primary resources you have. Their archives were used really extensively by Dr. Sarah N. Buckley, who's the expert really on Irish childhood studies and child abuse in 20th century Ireland. I did not use them for my PhD or for my MA. They did not respond to me for my MA inquiries. And later on, I found out that they were in transition, I believe. So they were sort of reorganizing their archives. And also I decided that it probably would be more valuable for me to look at court records. My methodology is unique, of course it is, in matching court records with historical newspaper articles. And I felt that there's loads more to do with the ISPCC archives, but yeah, they were a bit, I think after, I suppose, granting access to Dr. Buckley, they reorganized them, and then they seemed to be a bit reluctant, not because of her, just saying, they seemed to be a bit reluctant to open them again. But yeah, certainly have much more work to do with all those organizational archives. We'd love to get our hands on them.
So that sounds like a postdoc in the making then.
Yeah, so much more to do.
Anyway, well, listen, we'll leave it there. Una's put her details in the chat. I know I put my details somewhere in the chat there as well. So listen, thank you very much, everyone. And I think we'll just end it there. But a huge round of applause to all of our presenters.